wondering how I got into this mix.
Hey friends, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. Today we're going to talk about veganism. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, since you can no longer depend on YouTube, Facebook, and the other controlled corporate social media channels to show you my content. You want to bookmark our website, and of course you can follow us on Steemit, on BitChute, on Minds, and MeWe. Today, though, we're going to be looking at a video from someone I consider to be a friend and an inspiration. Larken, you have definitely inspired me at different times and both of our work. Originally, I didn't know who Larken was until I got involved in the anarchist voluntarist movement. I think I discovered his work back in 2011 or 2012, and then actually we've interviewed him a couple times on our channel. For those who, or at least one time, for those who have not seen that, check that out. And today, this video Larken published just about a week ago, Vegan Dishonesty. I've watched it a couple times now. So in the beginning of the video, Larken, you make the request, to watch the video all the way through and to, not strawman any of the arguments that he puts forth. And he makes it clear, like, hey, don't say this, strawman. This is not what I'm saying. So that's helpful for those who would attempt to do that. And also, oh, well, I guess I should preface this with saying, but I am a vegan. I'm a vegan anarchist. I haven't really ever done a coming out video as a vegan anarchist, but if you've watched the channel long enough, then you've heard me talk about it here and there. I don't make it the necessarily focus of my work, but I will show you in a couple minutes the work that I have done, the part of my book, Manifesto of the Free Humans, that I wrote relating to animal consciousness, animal rights, and sort of this concept of veganism. But we'll get into all that. First couple of things I just want to say about Larken's video is, so in addition to kind of making sure to say, to set the boundaries of what strawman arguments he was not making, he is essentially saying here that he has some common ground with vegans, and of course vegans are those who choose not to not only eat but not use animal products at all. So we don't use leather. We don't use dairy. We don't use eggs. We're not eating animal meat or anything of that sort. And there are, of course, some things that perhaps vegans are participating in and using that contain animal products that they are unaware of at the moment. There's a lot of animal products in a lot of our world, but generally the idea is to consciously opt out of that whole paradigm. And the reasons are numerous and diverse, just like the reasons that people become anarchists is numerous and diverse. So for some, it's a moral thing, basically saying, that they think it's wrong to harm animals, or the violence is wrong, or things like that. Some come because of a health perspective, trying to get healthier by going first vegetarian and then maybe shifting to veganism later. And I'm not going to get into this whole argument whether or not people think being vegan is healthier or not. Honestly, I don't consider myself a militant vegan. I'm not a militant vegan. And a militant vegan I would define as somebody who is incapable of communicating with other people who are carnists or meat eaters without getting into an argument. A militant vegan is somebody who uses their aggression to lash out at meat eaters, throwing things at them, verbally attacking them, couldn't even sit down at a table with somebody if they're, a meat eater, or especially not if they're eating meat right there. And to some extent I understand this, but in the interest of finding common ground, and also trying to communicate with people, I don't act as such. And it's not very effective, I've learned over the years as an activist, because not only am I a vegan, but I'm an anarchist, and as an anarchist, I have very little hope of converting the whole world to accepting the idea of self-governance. I have even less hope of convincing the entire world to become vegan. So, and I know that not every body is the same, and not every chemical makeup of body is exactly the same, and perhaps there are some diets that do work better for some people than others. That's all I want to say on that particular health aspect. But it could be a moral thing, it could be a health thing. At the end of the day, it's about not participating in the exploitation of animals, and whether that be for food or for other things, because veganism is also against the circus, it's against the rodeo, and against condoning and participating in those. And to me, again, as an anarchist, that's just rejecting another system of authoritarianism, another system that represents violence, force, and coercion. But let's get into some of the things that Larken talks about. Now, the first thing he said I kind of felt was unnecessary. He's like saying meat is murder, and of course it's good to define terms and to actually have clear language. That's valuable, it's important, and I've learned that as an anarchist and specifically just learning about philosophy. And a lot of people who fail at philosophy are not very specific in their language, and so there's a lot of room for mistakes to be made and for misunderstanding. And so his complaint here is about meat is murder, and he breaks it down saying like, okay, that phrase literally doesn't make sense. Meat is just meat, right? But I think that it's clear that that term is shorthand for a bigger idea that you could have possibly explored more, and maybe in some of the videos, throughout some of the video, you actually touched on some of it. But the point is, meat is murder. Although I'm not one person to really hold a sign with that or wear a t-shirt of that or that, yell that at somebody, but what it is trying to get at is the fact that supporting the meat industry, not just the factory farming industry and all of that's horrible atrocities, but even let's say, oh, look, there's, organic, free range, whatever, like you can still find horrible videos from those same farms where these animals are supposedly living humanely and happily, which again, that's all subjective, right? One person's humane is just putting a nice bow on violence. And yes, there are some who argue, look, the legal definition of murder only applies to humans. Whatever you want to call it, shooting something in the head or raising them, domesticating them just to later slaughter them and eat them. And I think that's like not only just a pretty shitty existence, but I definitely think that includes a level of violence. So whether we call that murder or not, I don't know. But the point is that by supporting that industry, by supporting and by continuing to eat meat when you have options not to is contributing to violence, is I think maybe another better way to put it, is contributing to force and to coercion of an animal. And then we can get into the topics of, well, some would say, yes, but man is the rational being. We are we have this level of consciousness. Other animals don't. They don't have the ability to have rational thoughts. Or some would say that some idiots out there think that animals don't feel pain, which is pretty just ignorant to think at this point in time. But animals of all types feel pain and are intelligent and are conscious of their experience. And the other aspect of this is, well, I'll hold off on that for right now. Let's just focus on the meat is murder thing. So I thought that was kind of a silly, argument to make. But the point is that when you eat meat, unless you are, and some would even say even if you are hunting your own meat, you are contributing to larger systems that are inherently violent. And that's just the unfortunate part of it. But even, let's say if you're a vegetarian, right, but you still are, you order all veggie pizza, not even a vegan pizza, or maybe even a vegan, right? You order from Domino's or Papa John's or some sort of mainstream kind of place that is sourcing all of its produce and all of its veggies, tomato sauce from factory farms, giant, monocropping, institutions that are still doing harm to the planet and still a part of this industrialization, big factory farm system. You're still doing damage. So yes, you're not hurting animals, but you're not escaping the problems with that system itself. So to me, being a vegan, I extend that not just only being a vegan and just switching over to buying, genetically modified, factory farmed veggies or processed veggie vegan stuff. No, but actually trying to get closer to my diet and to disconnect from that system. And then also here, Larken talks about Carnism, and which I think again, he disagrees that Carnism is a thing. He says eating meat is the same as just putting on shoes. There's no shoeism just because you decide to put on shoes, right? And so just making a decision like eating meat isn't an ideology or philosophy. That in itself is true. But just like there are militant vegans, there are also people who eat meat, and when presented with the information that, well, for one, there are alternatives to the way that they are consuming and food and the way that they are sustaining themselves, they would still choose a violent method. They would still choose an environmentally destructive method. They would, you know, fight to defend that in the same way that people who would be like, yeah, you're right, the state does certain violent actions, or, you know, the cops do this or that, but I'm still going to participate in that. I'm still overall going to support it. You know, that's what the funny thing is. If you're a vegan and an anarchist, you see the same kind of common arguments. Like people are like, well, who will build the roads? Or, you know, as vegans, you're like, where will you get your protein? Or just, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in both areas, because governance and the idea of government and voting is very close to people's hearts. So they're afraid of something like anarchism. It's like, it's just something that they feel like their duty, they're called to do. And obviously when you're talking about people's diet, that's something that's very close to people. And so it's difficult to challenge those views. I'm not necessarily saying that about Larken. I'm just saying that that's something I've come across. So, Carnism is, I would say it is an ideology. Not everybody who eats meat practices that. Now we can see here, this is from, it comes from, that idea comes from social psychologist Melanie Joy, who I do think is interesting and has a lot of important things to contribute to the conversation. She wrote this book that really put the concept of Carnism out there, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, an introduction to Carnism. And she also basically says that Carnism is a subset of speciesism, which Larken did acknowledge in the video and said that, yeah, he is a speciesist because he prefers one species over another. And at the end of the day, I think he does a good job of pointing out that most of us are, and we'll get to that in a second. But I do think speciesism is an issue and is a problem, and that Carnism comes from that. Basically, the idea that the book title illustrates, that, you know, some of the animals are to be treated in this way, and some of them are to be used as products, and some of them are to be used as food. And it all comes down to preferences at the end of the day, right? Preferences that some people choose to sustain themselves versus others. And as an anarchist, I'm not sitting here trying to advocate using the force of government to ban people from eating meat or to do things like that. But I am saying that we are at a point in time where you have an option. We have evolved to the point where you don't need to have a diet that includes violence. And again, yes, eating plants, if you're supporting those same systems, if you're not talking about localized, decentralized food production and permaculture, then your vegetarian and vegan diet can still be contributing to environmental destruction and to loss of biodiversity that could end up hurting animals. And those are indirect ways, right? There's always anti-vegans who come out and say, well, what about this? Your diet's still killing people. But that's a big difference than choosing voluntarily to continue to have a diet that directly involves violence of living beings. And yeah, so I do believe Carnism is a thing, and you can go to her website here, carnism.org. I guess she founded a nonprofit that's all about this, but she describes it as the invisible belief system or ideology that conditions people to eat certain animals. It is essentially the opposite as veganism. Carn means flesh or of the flesh. It's invisible. People rarely realize that eating animals is a choice rather than a giving, and meat-eating cultures around the world, people typically don't think about why they eat certain animals but not others, or why they eat animals at all. And I think that's interesting because whether you agree with her view or not, I'll tell you this, that when I first started to become vegetarian in 2008 or so, it was because of health reasons. And I had health issues, and the doctor recommended I switch to vegetarianism as a way to help my body process better and to not have to process meat. Not that I was ever really a heavy meat eater. So that was the beginning of it. Then, you know, eventually later I switched over to veganism, but really the moral aspect of my non-meat diet came from looking at my pet cat and eventually just really seeing him as a friend, because, you know, I don't even really use that word pet when it comes to him. His name is Jimmy. I do truly see him as a friend and not as my prisoner. And with cats, I think this is much easier to do because cats kind of come and go and do their own thing. I have a food bowl for him that I put food in, and if he chooses to come back to my house and to come inside and sleep inside or get food, then he's welcome to, but he's not forced to. And, you know, I don't hold him a prisoner. If he decides to leave and make it on his own, then that's up to him. So I really just one day looked at him and was like, wow, this is my best friend. I don't want to treat him like, or eat him like, or abuse him or hurt him. And if I was born in another part of the world, he might be he might be my food, and I might be, you know, friends with a different type of animal. So I realized, well, I don't want to eat anybody's best friends or anything like that. So that's just how simple it came for me. And I decided that I didn't want to participate in that. And later on, I became more aware of things like speciesism, Carnism, and Larken makes some good points here regarding the subjective choices and the sort of arbitrariness of veganism, though, because everybody has a different idea of what type of animal, and he gives some different examples about, would you save this animal over this animal, or save this animal over a human, which I think are interesting ideas. And the truth is that our values are subjective, and we do make preferences, and so you might rather run over a pile of ants and kill thousands of ants to save one dog or one cat or one human or whatever. And that's making a choice. That's being a speciesist. And that's the truth of the matter. So even as vegans, we can be speciesists. But I think that sort of does miss the point of that the goal is to reduce violence in general. I'm an anarchist because I think force, violence and coercion are wrong. And so I try to reduce the need for those things in all of my relationships, including my relationships with other animals or my diet, and reducing the level of violence involved in that. And so that's why I decided to become a vegan and to make that conscious choice, because I don't have to do so. And despite, I do disagree, Larken, that, I don't know, I guess it's again subjective, but the idea of, is it worse for an animal to, get sick in the wild and slowly die and starve to death, or to just be killed for sport and turned into meat? I don't know. Some would say, cool, a bullet to the head, it's over and done. Others would say, at least the animal has the freedom to thrive, right? Because some would say, hey, well, yeah, you're under government control, but at least you're allowed to thrive in some way, right? Or at least, the government should come take you and put you out of your misery rather than letting you, roam free and try to live your life and create your own path, right? I don't know. I just feel like that's not really a strong argument. And personally, I think the animals would want to be as free as possible and experience their life. And if that does include a grisly, slow starvation, then yeah, I think that's a state of nature. And, you could also say shooting the animals is a state of nature. My point is here, I understand that there is some arbitrariness to deciding what animals you prefer over others, and that we each do draw lines about which animals we prefer. But the point is to try to make decisions that reduce violence in our lives. Now, I want to show you here, if you visit consciousresistance.com and go to the books category, you can download my book for free, the third book, The Manifesto of the Free Humans. And this chapter here is Stewardship of the Earth. Talks about our relationship to the planet, our relationship with animals. And we talk about this from a private property, sort of libertarian, voluntarist perspective. And I think that you guys could get something of value out of this. And Larken sort of touched on this as far as like seeing somebody, his neighbor, abusing kittens, and at some point he would intervene and physically try to impede from somebody doing so. And I make a similar argument here in the book, where we go into discussing defending people who are willing to get arrested or, fight to protect the earth or fight to protect animals and things like that. And I do think that it's in line with for those who care, or who are libertarians or voluntarists or anarchists, that it is in line with this idea of respecting people's justly acquired property, but at the same time respecting all life. So I just want to read this for a moment here. So for one example, one could argue that a homesteader who causes irreversible harm to their property is initiating force against future generations of property owners and the planet itself. So we're talking about the earth right now. Damage done to one piece of property will undoubtedly lead to contamination of adjacent properties due to the interconnected nature of the environment. What this means is that polluters themselves are actually committing the first act of aggression and would open themselves up to consequences from neighbors. So we're talking about the environment there, but it's a similar concept. So in book 1 of this series, we mentioned the need for humanity to rethink our relationships with non-human animals and the planet. We discussed the implications of consciousness and rights applied to animals and the environment. Although some will argue that animals are incapable of rational thought and therefore incapable of being considered anything other than property, we have come to the conclusion that animals should be given equal status to children, the elderly, adults with diminished mental capacity, or similar vulnerable groups incapable of self-defense and reason. Which each of these groups, it is generally accepted that a guardian or agent of the vulnerable individual would be justified in defending them against the initiation of force. This same logic can be applied to animals and potentially the earth in reasonable circumstances. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get some crap from people for that, but basically what we're saying here is that we don't abuse children. They're seen as having some form of rights, even though they can't defend themselves and maybe can't make mature decisions at certain points. And the elderly are a protected class, even if they can't defend themselves. And those with mental illnesses and things of that sort. So why can't we extend that same level of, quote unquote, rights or protection or support of certain animals? And now again, it's where do we draw the line, right? Well, I guess that depends on each of us as a society and maybe as decentralized communities, because for me, this is more about the way I want to live within the confines of my ideal, voluntarist, intentional community. This is not about a way I want to force other people to live. But this last part I want to mention here is, for example, if you witness your neighbor abusing their dog for no good reason, you may feel called upon to ask them to cease and desist. If that fails, you could gather your freedom cell, your group of community members, and issue a warning. And if that also fails to end the violence, you might also consider physically removing the dog from the abusive owner. If the owner views his dog as property, he may consider you to be aggressing upon his legitimate claim to ownership and choose to respond violently. At this point, we have two individuals who believe they are right. This situation, okay, so we get into some solutions about this. My point is that, there are going to be people with differing claims, and I think that we should get to the point where we can evolve past the need for these type of systems. I'm not advocating a fascist vegan takeover where every individual is forced to abandon meat eating. However, I am advocating a more conscious relationship with the animals and with the planet itself. So, yeah, that's all I really think, for me as a vegan that matters, is that we can ask people to try to think about the actions they take and whether or not they contribute to force and violence. And that goes everywhere, from whether you participate in governmental systems, whether you condone war and violence, and what you eat and what that, supports through those actions. So let me know what you think below. And Larken, if you sat through this, I appreciate it. And let me know your thoughts, man. Maybe we can have a sit-down interview sometime and talk about this together. But thank you guys for listening. Please do bookmark theconsciousresistance.com. And I'll talk to you soon. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, you are free. Peace.